Hello everyone, I'm Captain Logan, and today I want to talk about a series that I was working on last year that was a reboot to a thing that I had abandoned a long time before that, and finally answer the question that a few people here and there have been asking me about. I just want to be totally transparent about this and let people know what happened with this in case you're curious. What in the world ever happened to Capfall, which was, I want to say, the long-awaited, long-anticipated, maybe for a few people, sequel to Spawn Year. Capfall was, like I said, a reboot of a thing that was originally called Batcap the 48-Hour Halloween, and the gimmick of it was, instead of being forced to review a bunch of Spawn material for a whole year, or I get buried in a grave full of Spawn stuff, I would have to review all of Nightfall within 48 hours, and there was a different villain, it was a different kind of conceit. Initially, it was in the same kind of structure as Spawn Year, where it was supposed to be a alleged recreation of something that actually really happened. So, like with Spawn Year, spoilers for that show, but the idea there is everything you're watching is actually my recreation of ostensibly real events. And when I rebooted the thing, one of the many reasons I started over is I had this notion of doing it as a found footage thing, and I thought it would be fun to really separate it from Spawn Year, because in some ways, because of all the experience with that show, I was making a better product with Batcap than I had with Spawn Year, but there were a lot of things I wasn't happy with just the story direction of it, and I had written several scripts beyond what got posted that nobody has ever seen, and it was kind of running away with itself. I kind of jumped the shark with it, I think, and I was going to have to really restructure all of that anyway. And so I put it on hold for a whole bunch of different reasons. Back in, goodness, was it 2017, 2018? I would have to go back and look. I don't even remember now. And I had every intention for a long time of getting back to it, but then there were a lot of life changes, and that show was supposed to take place in 2016, and I was shooting it well after that. And a lot of things in my basement had changed. I didn't look the same, et cetera, et cetera. And it was really difficult to go back and make it, look like it did and hang on to that continuity. And that became even more impossible when I moved. And now I'm in the bunker, and there was no chance at going back where I left off. I tried to come up with some kind of fun, cutesy way of doing that, where just the very next episode, everything looked different, and there was either some kind of in-continuity excuse for it, or we just didn't draw attention to it and we moved on, and I just could not get excited about either of those ideas. So I said, whatever, we'll full-on reboot it. I don't like leaving things unfinished, which is one of those kind of greatest strengths is also my greatest weakness kind of things in my mind. And like I said, I had that idea for the found footage thing. I had some new notions about the villain and what direction the whole thing could go, and I got really excited about it again. I had this whole story that I wanted to tell, and I'm going to tell you guys some of the big secrets in this video too, so stay tuned, because toward the end I'll talk about some of the things that I planned on doing with it, because sadly at this point you're just never going to see it. I would love to go back and finally finish that show as it was, but just like before, there are a lot of reasons that that's kind of impossible at this point, and I'll talk about some of that as well. The Batman sequel to Spawn Year is an idea that goes all the way back to the end of Spawn Year. My wife and I, this is at the end of 2014, beginning of 2015. Spawn Year ends in October of 2014, and we were already kicking around ideas for sequels. As much as that show just absolutely killed me, I couldn't help but come up with all these, potentially cool ways to continue the thing. And the main reason I wanted to keep it going, or I wanted to do another show, I should say, because there would be space in between. Well, a couple of big things. One of them is just, it was really fun to build sets, and I was having fun working with Pierce, who made the Spawn costume and a lot of props for us, and other costumes and things. And so I really wanted to do another narrative thing because I was enjoying doing that. And I kind of felt like I got to play television producer and director and actor and everything. And I felt like I was getting, half decent at the narrative thing and doing my own, kind of pseudo AVGN type review series. But also, and it was just fun, doing that kind of writing, I should say. I was able to tell a story at the same time as I was doing reviews. And it was difficult to find time to sit down and write short stories or novels or anything, which is my first love and, the reason I got into writing in the first place. And so I could kind of have my cake and eat it too. I wanted to have that experience again. But I also had just this crazy idea of doing Spawn Year with Power Rangers, and I loved the yin-yang of that. I thought it would be really fun, and this is before I had so much Power Ranger content on the channel, so this is back when a lot of people probably didn't even realize I was really a big Power Rangers fan. And there's this joke in the pilot that a lot of you guys that watch Spawn Year will probably remember, where Dooms Vince, who of course is forcing me to review Spawn comics for an entire year. He's going to throw me in a grave filled with Spawn memorabilia. He goes, I had these two different ideas. I could either make you review Spawn or make you review Power Rangers. It would be called Morphin Year, and it would have been awesome. And I got a lot of comments about this Morphin Year idea. Cap, surely you're going to do that sequel. And the more I thought about it, I just kept coming up with these crazy, absurd ideas. And like I said, I liked kind of the opposite nature of that to Spawn Year. But the problem with it was it seemed like too much of a shark jump between the conceit of Spawn Year, where, spoilers for that show, by the end, everything you've been watching is just ostensibly my recreation of real events. And there is of course, pseudoscience to the whole thing. There's a kind of a science fiction conceit there, but more or less the whole thing kind of made sense and wasn't overly fantastic. And to do Power Rangers, it would absolutely have to go into this crazy, fantastic realm. I couldn't do the exact same thing I had done before. I actually did intend on making that show another recreation of events like I had with Spawn Year, but it wasn't going to be a whole thing that had happened in my head. It was going to be actual, literal mythology like from Power Rangers. And I had this really fun idea. Part of the reason I wanted to do it, too, was just to build a command center in my basement. And, my mentor was going to be Dan Torrey, and he was going to be Zordan. And we actually, when he was here a few years ago, we shot his head for the floating head sequences for Zordon, just like I did with Dooms Vince for the Dooms Vince sequences in Spawn Year. And then of course I never ended up using them. We did use some of the footage that we shot with him here, not in this house because we moved since then. But we shot some stuff with him in a lab coat where he's getting my DNA so that he can clone me. That's a whole thing in that story, in both iterations of it now. And we used that in the original pilot for Batcap, the 48-hour Halloween, which later became Capfall. And anyway, long story short, I decided that it was just, like I said, too big of a leap, like a bridge too far to go from the relatively grounded nature, relatively, of Spawn Year into I'm morphing through the power of review. That was always the plan. It wasn't that I was forced to review stuff. It was that if I reviewed a thing, I would then have enough power to morph and then, to to morph, and then I would be able to fight whatever monster came at me that episode. It was going to be a really ambitious project. There was going to be a lot more action in it and stuff. The Batman idea was supposed to be the Gap Bridger, so we said, well, let's make it a trilogy. So I would review what turned out to be really god-awful, dark, edgy, gothic comics. And then in the middle, I would get my great love, Batman. And it would be mostly really great material. Originally, the idea wasn't Nightfall. It was just going to be a lot of different kinds of Batman material, just like we did with Spawn. And then we would end it off with Power Rangers, and so it would bookend with like weird, absurd, not good stuff, but in like totally different ways. And eventually that became Morphin Mania, because I decided that it didn't really make sense to try to review Power Rangers in the same format that I did Spawn Year. There were a lot of issues with that whole idea. I felt weird about doing two shows that were about comic reviews primarily, and then one that was a TV show. I was worried about copyright issues with, getting flagged or blocked, just like I've had to deal with stills and footage with Superhero Rewind, which is why that's a podcast now. And so there were issues with whether I would even be able to post that show. And I didn't think I could review it on the same level that I did even Spawn. And so then I thought, well, what is Batman Year building to now? Like, is it going to be just a sequel that doesn't have a third part? What is the end of that? And that's one of the main reasons that I quit making that show initially before I rebooted it, because I didn't make the decision to not do Power Rangers until I had made a few episodes of that show, and all of my writing was moving toward Power Rangers. That was the whole point of it. There was going to be a big cliffhanger at the end where I would end up basically becoming a Power Ranger or leading to that. And the big bad guy of that show was supposed to get launched into space and go to the moon and get his skin filleted off and basically become like a Captain Logan version of Lord Zed. And so the whole thing was setting up this Power Rangers year that we decided, just for, again, lots of reasons, didn't make sense to actually make finally. So then, fast forward to last year, and I just couldn't stop thinking about that show, and all these cool ideas I had for it. Like, originally, Nega-Logan, we were going to find out, was from another dimension, and that dimension was going to be more of a Power Rangers universe, where he was this clone of Captain Logan that Dan Torrey had made because he was afraid that I was going to stop reviewing after my traumatic experience with Spawn Year, and he thought that it was important that I continued what I was doing to try to help people, understand notions of critical thinking and to think more about the things that they reviewed and stuff. And he just thought that the work I was doing was, for whatever reason, important. Nega-Logan was supposed to be the exact opposite of me, where he's like this perversion of Captain Logan who wants everybody to think exactly like he does, and his ideas are always right and to him. And if he says something is good, it is absolutely good. And if he says something is terrible, it's absolutely terrible. And it's completely black and white. And this is the same in both versions. The idea was supposed to be that his big endgame is he wants to make a whole bunch of Captain Logan clones that he would control, that would take over the channel and review every single thing that ever existed to try to tell everybody how they're supposed to think about all kinds of content. And the alternate dimension thing started feeling weird to me when we weren't going to Power Rangers. And I was like, well, what would it even be? What is the ending of that show? It was always a cliffhanger in my head. And then I had this crazy idea of turning it into my own personal clone saga. We started with clones. Doomsvince is a clone. Captain Logan was responsible for that. He gets Dan Torrey to clone Vince in Spawn Year in order to have some help on the channel to review more things, but that whole thing backfires on him. And then the sequel with Batman was supposed to be this other kind of backfiring, where the same kind of thing happens to Captain Logan instead of Vince this time, but instead of it being somebody that's just not remotely interested in reviewing, it's somebody who, again, totally perverts the whole idea of reviewing. And it isn't, here's what I think, make up your own mind, it's here's what you're supposed to think. And there was maybe going to be a little bit of commentary there about like anti-critical thinking culture and people who make reviews just to try to tell other people how what they think the correct answer is, and that sort of thing. So when I rebooted it, I had changed it, and we hadn't gotten to this yet. So you guys that watched that show, and thanks very much for taking a look at that, and everybody that did. And I really apologize for you're taking the time to do that and then never seeing the finished product. But the whole idea with that show was going to be you're not actually throughout that show looking at the original Captain Logan. The character that I'm playing is in fact a clone in the first place, and it was going to be kind of like the Spider-Man clone saga, where Ben Reilly thinks that he's Peter Parker. It was going to be that same thing with me. And somewhere toward the end of that, Jason is investigating this and does some detective work throughout the show. You might remember we keep jumping back and forth between perspectives in that. So there's all these like journal entries that Jason's making, or these kind of blog entry things. And something is kind of weird and fishy in his house, and and he comes to discover that the version of me, his dad that he's dealing with, isn't actually me; it's a clone. But it is in fact not the only clone, and it's not even the main bad guy. That clone is a henchman working for Captain Logan. Is a henchman of Nega-Logan. And we would have discovered either midway through or toward the end that, in fact, Nega-Logan was the original Captain Logan that you had been following through Spawn Year. And he had been so traumatized and his brain had gotten so messed up through Spawn Year that he completely lost his sense of perspective and forgot why he was reviewing in the first place, and totally loses himself. And the clone that you think is Captain Logan throughout the whole thing is a clone that Dan had made in order to try to keep the channel going and in order to keep Captain Logan's life stable. And so he more or less, is the original Captain Logan. He isn't actually, but he's basically what Captain Logan would have been like if he'd never really gone through Spawn Year, was the whole idea. And then in the third show, because it was still going to be a trilogy, I never could figure out how Batman Year could end without being a stepping stone to another thing. And it became so clear to me that, we're doing our own clone saga, so that third thing has to be the Spider-Man clone saga. And so the idea was going to be, when you get to the end of Batman Year, Nega-Logan seems to have won, and he takes over Captain Logan's basement. And the last shot of that show was supposed to be a bunch of Captain Logan clones all showing up, like materializing in my basement, as the clone that you've been watching, the protagonist of that show, is forced out. And in the third show, it was going to be this kind of role reversal thing where, pardon me, where the protagonist from Batman Year, from Capfall, was going to be kind of the antagonist for the original Captain Logan, like Doomsvince was, except he's a lot more benevolent and not really a bad guy, where he's trying to force Captain Logan to find his perspective again and to become himself again, and to not try to make everybody be just like him, and, you know, review everything and try to basically make, you know, the whole world in his image. And it was going to be this kind of redemption story where the bad guy from the previous show becomes the good guy eventually in the third show, and goes full circle by the end of that show, and goes all the way back to being the guy he was by the end of Spawn Year. That was basically the arc. That was supposed to be the whole idea. And a bunch of things made it to where I didn't feel like I could finish that show either. And I have to say I do regret it. I wish that things have been different and I could have finished that show. Lots of, and I'm not going to try a third iteration. That's not fair to you guys that have, you know, like spent time invested in this stuff, only to never see it get finished and come to fruition. And that's why I'm finally explaining what that show was supposed to be and giving away the big secrets. I thought about doing some compromised version of it where I don't know, like write a novel or something. And it's a neat story. I would have loved to have told it, but you've got to do it through the review process. But let me tell you some of the reasons that I ended up not finishing it. First of all, I'm getting older. I've got a lot of kids, and at this point I've got 5 kids. When I started that show, I had 3, and I didn't know that I was going to end up having twins. I did cancel that show, or at least wasn't making episodes, before we found out we were having twins. We didn't know we were having a 4th child, and I was not getting those shows made as quickly as I had anticipated. And that was probably unrealistic on my part. It was only 52 episodes. I really thought I could get it done before we got too far into Sarah's last pregnancy. But it didn't work out that way. And so so just, you know, time constraints, and not even just time, of course, because you can go back and look at my backlog and say, well, here's all these like random videos you decided to make. Why couldn't you have been doing Capfall instead, or Rewind, or whatever it is? And much of the time it's either videos that are just very easy, like this, to just sit down and shoot real quick, that don't require a lot of preparation, or videos that I'm able to make while I'm supposed to be doing something else, where you can kind of compromise and put them together, right? So there's a lot of videos with me like live streaming with my kids, like, you know, playing video games or playing the Power Ranger board game or something. That's me with built-in time that I need to be spending with my kids, also getting some content made for you guys simultaneously. And Capfall was a little bit of that, because Jason was an actor, and by the way, he's a better actor than I am, and I think he was fantastic in that show. And the main thing I regret about not finishing it is just that he was having such a good time with it. But we started doing our podcast. He was really enjoying that, and so we were able to kind of replace that with something. But eventually, I'd like to write a short film or a movie for Jason and I to maybe star in together, so that he can get to do some of that stuff again. But anyway, so, you know, another kid coming was certainly part of it, because I wasn't getting that, like I said, done as quickly as I was hoping, you know, and expecting that I would be able to. But also, I couldn't realistically see, like I said, just not having as much time and and my life just looking differently than it did with Spawn Year. Like a lot of this is just my trying to, I have to admit this to myself, my trying to kind of recapture a really wonderful period in my career. Like I really enjoyed making Spawn Year. Obviously there were ups and downs. There's a whole period where I quit making that show because I couldn't deal with how bad the actual content I was reviewing was. But I really enjoyed putting on the TV producer hat and or showrunner hat, and like I said earlier, I wanted to have that experience again. But I couldn't see it for the long haul. Ultimately, I was like, the only thing that makes sense to do is, by the end of this, is ultimately all of the Spider-Man clone saga. And then I'm feeling like I'm back to Spawn Year all over again because I know how bad some of that stuff is. And I haven't read all of it, but I went into Spawn Year not realizing that Spawn gets really terrible. And I know that Clone Saga is not good. And I was going to just kind of wreak havoc with my brain all over again. And it was going to be just, frankly, a bigger commitment than I thought I could realistically get away with doing. And at the point where I was like, are you really going to review Clone Saga? Like, is that really going to actually happen? It made it hard to really sit down and make that show. Interest was a problem, and I really thought that that was going to continue to be an issue when we got to Clone Saga. So there were some really devoted watchers of that show, and like I said, I really appreciate you guys, but it just wasn't getting the view counts that I felt like it needed to justify doing it, as opposed to something like the big mini-series for Superhero Rewind that it did for BVS. I was like, I've really got to prioritize the stuff that people are really wanting and asking for. And like I said, I don't like to leave things unfinished. You have to make, I always say this, but you have to find that balance between what you really want to do and what people really want to see. And the balance with that just wasn't there if I had to also do the Spider-Man Clone Saga. So like, I could have finished Batman Year and ended it on a cliffhanger and just said, okay guys, you got this show, but you're never going to see the end of it. And I didn't want to tell half a story. So there was that. There was also weird logistical stuff. Like, I think the biggest mistake I made with both iterations of Batman Year, Batcap and then Capfall, was not building a set. Was setting it where I already do my job, in my studio. Because I'm constantly changing things down here. Not as much behind me, but I was using the whole bunker, and just things are changing all the time down here. And I was kind of forced to not make any changes while I was using this as a set. That was getting infuriating. And then there's just weird little life stuff, like my glasses changed. I was really a stickler for continuity through Spawn Year, and I wanted to keep that going with the rest of this stuff. So I said, okay, if I've got new glasses, which, by the way, part of the reason I had to get new glasses is because my last ones were really scratched up. So it was, and of course it was an old prescription, so I couldn't see quite as well. So I'm trying to do this review while I'm looking at panels on a screen, right? And I'm looking like around these marks in my glasses. I get new glasses, they don't look anything like the old ones, and I'm going, okay, I could either just bite the bullet and let continuity be damned and have these new glasses, or I can hold on to continuity, which is what I tried to do. So I would have to remember to change my glasses out and have to deal with the stupid scratches. I hated that. There was a whole episode, I don't think it's one that ever got posted, because I shot 3 or 4 that I never ended up actually posting, where I forgot to change the glasses out, and I did the entire episode like that. And I was like, I'm not going to go back and reshoot this now. So now I'm stuck with this huge continuity mistake, and I wasn't happy with that. This chair is new. Part of the reason that I got this chair, my wife was really nice and bought this for me as a surprise, is because the old chair I was in was really messing my back up. and I really needed a new chair, and I had been putting it off and putting it off, and finally Sarah bought me this great gaming chair, which is really kind of saved my life professionally because I can sit in it for long periods of time, and I'm comfortable, and it kind of forces me to sit with decent posture. And so I was gonna have to trade the chairs in and out and sit in that chair that was throwing my back out for these reviews that it kept going, anywhere between half an hour to an hour. And that was going to be a big problem. So just, all these little kind of logistical things. I also wasn't as happy as I was hoping I would be with the off-the-cuff nature of it. And I cut some corners, feeling like that was necessary because I only had so much time to shoot. And so I said, this show, I'm not going to do like Spawn Year. I'm not going to write the reviews. I'm just going to do them off the cuff. And I thought that made sense for the story I was telling, where it's like, you've only got 48 hours. You're not going to have time to actually script the reviews. And of course, you could expect the audience to have a suspension of disbelief and go, we realize that this isn't actually off the cuff, and that the guy that's making the show is scripting them, but pretending like they're not scripted. And I could have done it that way, but I thought, A, it would be more authentic if it was made up on the spot, because the whole thing was found footage, and a lot of found footage not everything, I mean, Chronicle scripted, but a lot of found footage movies like to go the whole 9 yards and have a lot of improvisation and stuff. And I was like, well, I'll try my hand at that, and I do a lot of off-the-cuff reviews anyway. And it's weird because it wasn't supposed to look polished, but it still wasn't as polished as I felt like maybe it kind of should have been. I felt like I was hemming and hawing too much. There were too many, ums and things, and I cut out as much of that kind of stuff as I could. It's part of the reason I shot it with 2 different angles, so I could jump back and forth and mask the cuts. But the reviews were also just getting too long. I was finding I had way too much to say about each issue. And that was messing with the conceit. It was going to get to a point where you wouldn't be able to suspend your disbelief, I don't think, in believing that I could read the comics and sit down and talk about them in the hour that I had allotted, because those reviews were, some of them, starting to get too close to an hour themselves. And it's like, okay, so he's reviewing 3 issues. When did he read them? And I got really caught up in the believability of it, and again, the continuity of it. And so I was getting really unhappy with the way it was working out. And the actual scripted parts, the actual, story stuff, the bookends of the episodes, I was really happy with how those were turning out. And I really liked the look of the show and the way I was shooting it and everything, but I wasn't totally sure about the review content. And I've heard from a few people like Connor who have said that the off-the-cuff thing was working fine for them, and they were really enjoying it. And again, I appreciate that, and I don't mean to be too much of a perfectionist. And again, I started this thing with some cutting corners in the first place. I was trying not to be too much of a perfectionist, making the kinds of compromises I needed to make the thing happen. But ultimately, it just wasn't working out for, like, all these reasons that I've told you about. So, that being said, I have every intention of eventually finally reviewing Nightfall. Not within a story conceit, but just, talking about that series. And I don't know if it'll be like trade to trade, or if I'll continue with, because I don't know, if there was enough interest in just the review part of it, I would consider doing the same schedule I had with the single issues and the 2s and 3s I was doing at a time, just without the story conceit. Maybe in the costume still, just for the fun of it. I don't know. I've lost some weight, so it's easier to put that costume on. I'd probably look a little bit better in it. Like, it'd be kind of fun to do that. I don't know. But I might gauge the audience at some point and see how much interest there is in that. I still have that same mentality where I don't like to leave things unfinished, and there's other stuff that I still haven't gotten to, and this is a project that I have finally, for good, put to bed in at least the format that it was in. And like I said, I'm not going to do a third reboot. And at this point, I would have to, because I'm not sitting in the chair again. I'm not wearing those glasses again. And Jason is, once again, just like last time, this is another problem with the original iteration of this. He's too much older, as are my other kids. So anyway, I want to apologize, I guess, to Pierce and to Vince, who shot Doomsvin stuff for me a whopping 3 times for this show. The scene in the first episode that he's in the original iteration, we actually had to shoot twice because we were going to start that show the year before and I had to put it on hold, and then we changed the living room around, so I had to reshoot that scene, and then we had to do a different version of it even that didn't include my wife, that was just me and him last year for this new version of Batman Year, and then now I'm not finishing that show. So yeah, apologies to Vince and to my wife and to Pierce and everybody that was involved in that show that were committed to trying to help me get it finished. Apologies that that's not actually happening now. But like I said, hopefully at some point I can get back to Nightfall. I've got some other things that I want to prioritize and finish before that people seem to care more about. Unless I just do, like I said, a trade-to-trade kind of thing, in which case it would be easier to sneak that in whenever I feel like reading that and talking about it. I've talked to Kareem about potentially reviewing that with him, so if I go that direction, that's probably the co-host, and I probably wouldn't do it on my own at that point. But anyway, that's most of what I wanted to tell you about with that. Hopefully I didn't leave any major stuff out, but it's a little bit of a bummer. I do want to do the scripted thing again, or I should say the narrative thing again at some point, but not with a lengthy series like that, because it's just not realistic for my lifestyle at this point. And that's the main thing, is just, even though I was a husband and a father even when I made Spawn Year, my life looks completely different than it did in 2013, all these years later now. But I would like to make maybe a movie at some point. I've considered doing a Spawn Year type format with just one big review in it, kind of like James Rolfe did with the AVGN movie. And I don't know what kind of scale that would be on, and what the narrative conceit would be exactly, or what the subject matter should be. Because I don't feel like I have that thing that James Rolfe did with the E.T. game, where there's that one thing that everybody's been begging me to do that I'm dreading, that I don't want to ever do. Because the big ones were Dark Knight Rises, and as far as Superhero Rewind goes anyway, Dark Knight Rises and BVS, and I've done both of those things now. BVS might have been the thing to do this with, but I had, obviously, far too much to say about that, and I didn't know how to structure that review, how to organize it, except just scene for scene, which is a thing, of course, I couldn't do, with a narrative in a movie format. So if anybody has any ideas about that, I'd love to hear them, because someday a Geekvolution movie could happen, maybe, because that's a thing, of course, that I wouldn't have to commit to a million reviews and a big series over a long period of time, and I could really take my time making it, just that one thing. Thanks a lot for watching, folks, and I will be back soon with more reviews, more commentaries, and more fun, geeky stuff. See you later, folks.